Have you ever imagined the weight of a decision that changes not only the history of a people, but the spiritual destiny of humanity? Pontius Pilate was the man who held the authority to free or condemn Jesus. Before him stood the Son of God, silent, while the crowd clamored for blood. And Pilate, gripped by fear, politics, and silence, chose to wash his hands. But what happened next? Who was this man really? And why, 2,000 years later, does his name still echo in churches worldwide every time the creed is recited, suffered under Pontius Pilate? There's a reason for that. In this video, you'll discover what history hasn't told you about the most famous trial in humanity. We'll reveal not just what's in the Gospels, but also the political, spiritual, and human backdrop of one of the most controversial decisions of the ancient world. This isn't just a religious account, it's a deep dive into authority, cowardice, and conscience. By understanding what happened with Pilate, you'll see that his choices might not be so far from our own. Because in the end, we all face moments when truth stares us down, and it's up to us to decide, do we stay silent or take a stand? Stick with me until the end. What you're about to uncover might change your view of history and faith. Pontius Pilate didn't come out of nowhere. He was a Roman politician with a clear mission: maintain order and loyalty to Rome in one of the empire's most turbulent provinces, Judea. Appointed prefect, or procurator, by Emperor Tiberius around 26 AD, Pilate had full control over the region. Military power, tax collection, and above all, the authority of life and death in civil trials. But that role came at a cost. Judea was a ticking time bomb. The tension between Roman rule and the religious fervor of the Jews made every decision a political and spiritual risk. Historical sources like the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus and the philosopher Philo of Alexandria paint a harsh picture of Pilate. A ruthless man, insensitive to local culture and often cruel. According to Josephus, Pilate ordered massacres and sparked revolts by bringing pagan symbols into Jerusalem, disrespecting Jewish faith. Philo describes him as stubborn, violent, and prone to injustice. He was feared, not respected, a ruler who maintained control more through terror than wisdom. A man who used power as a shield but lived cornered, pressured by Rome on one side and local religious leaders on the other. His position was politically fragile. Rome demanded results: peace, obedience, stability. But Pilate governed a people who refused to accept Caesar as Lord. Any unrest, any misstep, could cost him his reputation or his life. So his tenure depended on his ability to avoid conflict and negative attention. It's in this explosive context that Jesus' trial unfolds. Pilate didn't know this Galilean man, but he could recognize a crowd on the verge of rioting. He knew that an unpopular decision could prompt the Pharisees to report to Rome. And he knew Tiberius wasn't patient with subordinates who lost control. But what most people don't know is that, despite his firm stance, Pilate harbored doubts. He was Roman, yes, but also human. Confronted with Christ, even without fully understanding him, he sensed something different. He may not have grasped Jesus' divinity, but he saw his innocence, his calm in the face of death, his lack of hatred. And for a moment, that touched something within him. Pilate wasn't just a ruler, he was a man in conflict. A conflict you'll understand more clearly from here on. Jesus' trial was both public and silent. Behind the formal appearances, invisible forces were at play. Political, spiritual, and personal. Pontius Pilate didn't know Jesus before that day, but he quickly realized this case was different. Religious leaders accused Jesus of claiming to be a king, a threat to Caesar's rule. But in questioning him, Pilate found no crime. Jesus didn't beg, didn't argue politically, didn't show fear. It was as if he was there by choice. And that deeply intrigued the Roman governor. The Gospels detail this moment. Jesus is brought to Pilate's palace at dawn. The high priests demand a conviction, claiming he opposed Rome. In his interrogation, Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus replies, "You say so." The answer wasn't a political threat, but a spiritual affirmation. Pilate then tries to dodge the decision. Learning Jesus was from Galilee, he sends him to Herod Antipas, the region's governor. Herod finds no fault either and returns him to Pilate. Now Jesus' fate is back in his hands. Pilate proposes releasing Jesus as part of a Passover custom where one prisoner was freed during the festival. He offers the crowd a choice between Jesus and Barabbas, a criminal convicted of murder and rebellion. He hopes they'll pick Jesus, but the crowd, stirred by the religious leaders, shouts for Barabbas. "What shall I do with Jesus called the Christ?" Pilate asks. "Crucify him," they yell. The governor hesitates. His wife, according to Matthew, sends a message, "Have nothing to do with this righteous man, for I have suffered much today in a dream because of him." The pressure mounts. The Pharisees threaten to report to Rome, accusing Pilate of freeing a self-proclaimed king. So, he takes water, washes his hands before the crowd and declares, "I am innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours." And there lies one of history's most symbolic moments, a gesture of neutrality that still carries the weight of a mission. Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified, not out of conviction, but fear. Not for justice, but convenience. And that gesture echoes in everyone who, faced with right and wrong, chooses silence, because in that moment, Pilate judged Jesus, but also judged himself. To understand what led Pontius Pilate to yield to the crowd, we must look beyond the visible scene. The decision to condemn Jesus wasn't just legal, it was shaped by political forces, external pressures, and inner dilemmas swirling around him like a storm. Pilate wasn't a free man. Despite his position of power, he lived under Rome's constant scrutiny, fearing any disturbance in the province could be used against him. Judea was one of the empire's most unstable regions, and keeping order there was a mark of competence. Any complaint to Caesar could cost him his post or his life. Beyond political fear, there was also spiritual unease. Jesus unsettled Pilate in an unusual way. It wasn't common to see a prisoner respond with calm, not return insults, not beg for mercy. Jesus spoke of a kingdom not of this world, strange to Roman ears accustomed to material conquests. Pilate didn't see him as a rebel. He saw an enigma, a different kind of king, speaking with authority but without armies, inspiring devotion without inciting revolt. This confused him, and perhaps began to trouble him deeply. Western Christian tradition often overlooks a key detail: the message from Pilate's wife. Have nothing to do with this righteous man. This intervention, noted in Matthew's Gospel, shows even Pilate's private circle was touched by spiritual unrest. Why would a dream trouble a Roman woman about a Jewish religious trial? The text doesn't elaborate, but the warning is there, and Pilate receives it before his final decision. He heard the voice of reason, intuition, family, and ignored it all. Why? The answer may lie in fear. Fear of losing power, fear of seeming weak, fear of the shouting crowd. Pilate tried to maneuver, to escape the decision, to please everyone. But in the end, when he handed Jesus over for crucifixion, he chose not to take a stand. He washed his hands, but couldn't wash his soul. His gesture, though symbolic, was a silent cry of guilt. The truth stood before him. But he chose the comfort of neutrality. And that's the drama that repeats through the centuries. Men and women facing truth, but silenced by convenience. Pilate was just the first to show the cost of that silence. After Jesus' trial, Pontius Pilate fades from the Gospels, but his story lingers in history and traditions across centuries. What happened to him after that decisive act? Many believe he carried on normally, but historical records and apocryphal accounts reveal another reality, a path of decline, shame, and perhaps despair. The man who washed his hands before the truth couldn't wash his conscience. And from there, his downfall began to take shape. Ancient historians like Eusebius of Caesarea report that Pilate was removed from office a few years after the crucifixion. Sources suggest that after brutally suppressing a Samaritan revolt, he was denounced to Rome for excessive force. Sent back to the imperial capital to justify himself, Pilate fell from grace. His political career ended in disgrace, and according to some traditions, he never recovered from the guilt he carried. Official Roman history doesn't detail his end, but various ancient texts, both Christian and pagan, suggest he ended his days in exile or took his own life, consumed by remorse. Eastern Christian traditions, however, offer surprising twists. In some Ethiopian church accounts, Pilate repented and converted to Christianity. In this view, his wife, called Claudia Procula, is revered as a saint for warning her husband and recognizing Jesus' righteousness. Though not part of the biblical canon, these stories show how Pilate lingered in Christian consciousness, not as a mere villain, but as a divided man, tormented by a wrong choice. Legends also claim that late in life, Pilate was haunted by voices and visions, reliving the moment he washed his hands. In parts of Europe, superstitions tied to his death emerged, like Mount Pilatus in Switzerland, where his spirit was said to appear on stormy nights, crying in anguish. These symbolic tales reinforce the idea that though he tried to erase his responsibility, he couldn't escape its weight. The truth is, no one emerges unscathed from an encounter with Jesus, even those who deny, ignore, or betray him. Pilate may be history's first example of someone who tried to live after rejecting the incarnate truth and failed. His name endures not for victories, but for a fatal mistake. A mistake time hasn't erased, because when truth is denied, it doesn't stay silent, it pursues. Pontius Pilate's journey invites us to reflect on a universal, timeless theme: the power of choice before truth. We're not just talking about a historical figure, but a mirror. Pilate represents everyone who at some point faced truth, recognized its force, and still chose silence. His hand-washing became a symbol of omission, and the silence, which seemed like comfort then, became condemnation. He had power, but instead of using it for justice, he used it to dodge responsibility. That's the essence of the cost of silence. We live in times when silence remains a tempting choice. When uncomfortable truths confront us in faith, morality, personal life, how often do we opt out? How often do we wash our hands before others suffering injustice or abandoned faith? Pilate wasn't the only one. He was just the first to show that when power separates from truth, it becomes a burden, not a blessing. Jesus' trial showed neutrality between good and evil is impossible. Those who try to stay in the middle end up yielding to evil out of fear of losing their place in the world. Pilate's example reminds us that conscience is a stricter court than any other. Public authority means nothing if you're a prisoner of silent guilt. Political control means nothing if your heart is divided. Pilate remains a warning to leaders, parents, teachers, politicians, pastors, and anyone with power over others or themselves. He teaches us that all authority carries a call to stand with courage, and when we don't, what we wash away with water returns in tears, because truth, sooner or later, demands an answer. Pontius Pilate's trial happened over 2,000 years ago, but its essence lives on. It wasn't just Jesus judged that day. Pilate was too, and in a way, we're judged every time we choose between silence and standing up. History reveals the facts, faith shows the meaning, and the Spirit confronts us with the question, before Christ's truth, what are you doing? Pilate tried to avoid responsibility. He hid behind neutrality. But time showed that in washing his hands, he signed his spiritual condemnation. This video isn't just a history lesson, it's a call for you to recognize today the value of standing for truth, to understand that Jesus wasn't just a wronged innocent, He is the Savior, and every choice before him matters. If this message touched you, write in the comments, "I choose the truth." That strengthens our community and your faith journey. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And stick with us, because here we seek more than information. We seek transformation. May your story not end like Pilate's. May it begin anew with the truth.